I've spent a lot of time trying to make my videos look cinematic. Buying better cameras, trying different lenses, experimenting with settings, but something always felt missing. The footage looked good, but it didn't feel like anything. And I think that's the difference between a video and a memory. When people talk about making videos look cinematic, they talk about lenses, cameras, resolutions, frame rates, all these different things. And all of those absolutely matter. But I think one thing that makes one of the biggest differences is color. Color can change the mood and the feel of an image within an instant. That's why we're all attracted to this film look that a lot of people talk about. You know, the kind of thing that you would see on the big screen on an A24 film or something else that you might have watched on your TV. Film has characteristics that digital cameras just naturally don't have. The way the highlights roll off, the way the colors respond, the grain, and the imperfections. As someone who's an avid movie watcher and grew up wanting to be a director, this is something that I've thought about a lot. Now, obviously, color grading cannot save bad footage. You need to really understand the basics of movement, storytelling, lighting, and composition. But once you do have something worth telling, color can help shape that emotion. So once we have something worth telling, how do we bridge that gap and get that film look that we're looking for? Since we can't actually shoot on film, we use something called film emulation. Film emulation is the process of making your digital footage look like it was shot on analog film. So now that we know what film emulation is, how do we do it? There's a couple different ways to do it, but the way that I'm going to talk about today is Dehancer. Dehancer is a film emulation plugin that's designed for DaVinci Resolve and a couple of other editing softwares, and this allows you to recreate that film look. Instead of just applying a preset, you're able to simulate things like film grain, halation, bloom, all of those things that give film its very distinct character and look. Dehancer reached out to me to test their plugin and give an honest review, so let's go ahead and see if we can get the look that we're chasing after. Dehancer has also given me a unique link to give to you guys so that you can get 10% off of your purchase, and I'll have that link down below. All right, so we are now in Dehancer, and we're going to start off with a 4-node work tree, and that's going to be our CST, our exposure, our white balance, and then Dehancer. Contrast and saturation are going to be done both in Dehancer, and theoretically you could do all of the things inside of Dehancer. I just choose the 4-node work tree because I feel like this works the best for me, and that goes to say that there's no one right way to do this. You can do this so many different ways. Okay, so we're going to start by clicking on our CST node and then dragging color space transform onto there. For our input color space, we're going to use Canon Cinema Gamut because I shot on the Canon R50V, so I have the Canon color space. And then for input gamma, we're going to use Canon Log 3 because that's the profile that my camera shoots in. And the output color space will be Rec 709. And then for our output gamma, we're going to have Cine on Film Log. A lot of people will tell you to use DaVinci Wide Gamut, and most people just prefer it because it's the widest color space, but I don't really enjoy the way my colors come out when I use it, and that's just another way to say that there's so many different ways to color grade and there's not one right answer to this. It's all kind of trial and error and experimentation and figuring out what works for you. So now moving over to our exposure node, the way that I like to do this is by adjusting the offset dial up or down depending on how I want to change the exposure, and then from there I can dial in the shadows and the highlights with the shadow and highlight dials as well. So now moving on to our white balance node, we're going to adjust this also using the offset color wheel rather than temperature and tint because this is just the way that I like to do it. And over here, less is more. You just want to make sure that, you know, your whites are as neutral as possible. And Dehancer, you'll be able to kind of give that stylistic look that you're looking for, whether you want to make it warmer or cooler. Next, we're going to move to our Dehancer node. We're going to type in Dehancer and drag that onto our footage, and you can see it immediately changes the footage. There's so many different settings and different things to play with here. I'm going to go ahead and just scroll straight to the bottom and hit disable all tools so that we're able to start from scratch and get a clean look. There is quite a lot that goes on in here, so I'm going to go through one by one and give you a rundown of each of them. I'm going to tell you guys the ones that I use and then just kind of give a brief overview of the ones that I don't use. So starting at input, we're going to set our source to Cine on Film Log because that is what our output was in our CST node, and as you can see, it gives us a nice image already. Temperature and white balance and exposure can all be adjusted here, but since I've already done that in two separate nodes, I'm going to go ahead and leave that as is. Okay, so now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and move to film, and this is where the fun begins. There's so many different film stocks to choose from in the profile tab. I wish there was an easier way to kind of see and preview these just by like scrolling through them, but you're gonna have to manually click and just see how it affects and alters the image. Some of them, you know, like 250D, I think has been my favorite so far. As you can see, when I drop it on there, it definitely makes the image look a little bit weird, like all of the colors are off. But that's going to be fixed when we add the print and when we change the white balance and exposure up a little bit as well. You can also use the push or pull slider to kind of change up the look a little bit as well, but I prefer to just leave it as is. Next, we're gonna head to print, and this can be left as linear. You can use Cine on Film Log, you can use Kodak, you can use whatever you like. This is also stylistic preference and choice. I prefer to use 2383 because I think it looks the best with the 250D that I've chosen, but you can also change, you know, your exposure and a couple of other dials here as well. And the analog range limiter is a great way to pull down the blacks and whites just to get a more filmic look as well. Next, we're gonna move to Film Developer. Go ahead and enable that. And this is where I like to adjust my contrast and saturation. We're gonna adjust contrast via the contrast boost slider. Usually I try to slide that down a little bit. It just depends on the image. But color boost is where I like to add my saturation as well. And usually I'll keep that somewhere between like 75 and 95. As you guys can see, it looks really good, but you also don't wanna overdo that as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it around 75 for this clip. As you start to play with these settings, it'll start to make a little bit more sense as you kind of go through it. It's an experimentation process and it's supposed to be fun, so try not to overthink it too much. I'm also gonna go back to my exposure tab and just adjust that accordingly now that we've put a couple of other effects on. Moving over to film compression, this is where I like to get that highlight roll off, and as you can see, as soon as you enable it, you see that immediate difference. And you can change the impact, you can change the white point, the color density. These will not make sense until you kind of see it on your own, but I kind of like to leave most of these as is and just let it be what it is. Expand allows you to change the black and white points of your footage, as you guys can see here, just kind of changing that up. Similar to the analog range limiter, but you get a little bit more control. So sometimes I use this, sometimes I don't. Everything else down here is more or less stylistic, so you could use them or you could not. It really is all personal preference for the most part, but I'm still gonna run through everything. Halation is one of my favorites, and it basically gives like a nice reddish glow around your highlights. It's a little bit harder to notice on this clip. I'll try to zoom in a little bit so you can see it, but you can change the profile and you can amplify the amount as well so that you can kind of play with different looks and see how you like it. There's so many different options to choose from, so it's really personal preference as far as style-wise, how you'd like that to look. I'm gonna leave it on 35 no remjet and then move on to bloom. As you guys can see, it gives a nice dreamy look. I'm not really sure how else to explain it, but you can kind of see what it does there. You can either create a custom profile or use one of the ones that's there, and you can change the amount as well. I usually try to keep this somewhere in the middle, around 50%. Coming back up, we have color head, where you can change the colors of the image and you can adjust things to make them warmer or cooler depending on your preference. Go ahead and enable that. And you can see I can add some yellow or some blue, magenta, green, cyan, red, just kind of play with that. And then I can also do the same for my shadows, midtones, and highlights. I can make them warmer or cooler, and I can change the amount that affects the image as well. Film grain, I feel, is pretty self-explanatory. We'll go ahead and enable that, and you can see immediately that the grain just kind of affects the image, and then you can change the amount to which you would like that grain to affect the image. And you can also change the profiles or create a custom profile if you'd like as well. I don't use this super often. I'm not a big grain guy, but if I do use it, usually I'll use 8 or 16 and crank it pretty low. Film damage, as I showcased earlier, just kind of gives you those little imperfections that you see on film, and you can adjust that amount. You can also adjust the profile. As you can see, it kind of changes with the amount that I adjusted there. And this is not one that I use super often either, but very cool to have. Film breadth is kind of the changes in exposure, contrast, and color that you see as film kind of rolls through as it's being presented. You can change the impact and you can change the profile here as well. This is not one that I use very often either, but very cool to have still. Gate weave is kind of having the film move left and right as it rolls through. This is also not one that I use very often, but also cool to have. Overscan is how you achieve those stylistic film borders, and these are extremely customizable. There's so many different settings here that you can play with. This is not one that I use very often either, but it's also super cool to have, and you can get a lot of really cool images out of it if you just kind of play around with the settings and figure out what you like and don't like. Vignette is pretty self-explanatory. It just kind of darkens the edges, as you've seen, and kind of focuses your attention on the center of the shot. Monitor allows you to check on false color and see if you are clipping. Output is basically where you can change the total amount to which your changes affect your image. And LUT Generator basically allows you to take all your changes and make them into a LUT to be able to be used later on. So we're just about wrapped up now, so I want to just reiterate that color grading is a process that's supposed to be fun. It's a lot of trial and error, and I'm not a professional colorist by any means, so this is just kind of like what I've learned over the course of the last, 6 months to a year, and this is just, kind of what I like to do. There's so many different ways to accomplish whatever looks that you're looking for, and it's just all, experimentation and having fun with it. So now that I've showed you guys the workflow and spent some more time with Dehancer, I have some overall thoughts that I'd like to share. The biggest thing that I appreciate about Dehancer is the fact that it's not trying to be a one-click filter. There's so many different settings and effects that you can play with to kind of find your own style and figure out what you like and don't like. If I had one piece of feedback, it would be the film stock browser. As I said in the video, you have to manually click on each and every film stock to kind of see the look that it gives you and figure out what you like and don't like. And there's so many in there, so it takes a long time if you really want to kind of go through everything. I feel like being able to hover over each of the film stocks and preview them beforehand would be a great way to kind of quicken the process and make it a little bit smoother for users. Other than that, I've really enjoyed using it. I feel like the documentation and setup guides were super helpful. Another thing to keep in mind is that Dehancer is not just for DaVinci Resolve. It's for so many different editing software such as Sony Vegas, Premiere Pro, After Effects, and they also, if you don't want to use an editing software, have the Dehancer desktop app as well as the iOS app, which I have used and I'm thoroughly enjoying. My only gripe with the iOS app is I have an iPhone 16, so I'm not necessarily able to shoot RAW, and Apple has their color profiles kind of baked into their pictures when you take them, and that's not a Dehancer thing, that's more of just a Apple thing. You don't have as much flexibility when you're playing with that, but you do have all of the same settings that you're able to use in the Dehancer or desktop app within the iOS app, so it does give you a lot of flexibility as far as changing that look, but you just don't have as much flexibility as if you were working with a RAW image, and that's not a Dehancer thing. Like I said, that's more of an Apple thing, so that's something to keep in mind whenever you are shooting your footage. Overall, I think Dehancer is a really solid tool if you want to bring some character to your footage and get that really filmic look. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and finally take a look at our final result. I don't think color grading is about making every shot look like a movie. I think it's about understanding what you want people to feel when they watch it. Because years from now, when I look back at these videos, I don't want to remember the camera settings. I want to remember the moment.